Hello, my friends, and I hope you are having a fantastic day. So, kind of building off of the video I made yesterday, I want to talk about gaming quality of life features. And the reason this is top of mind for me right now is I found this article from PC Gamers says very few people would play a Morrowind-style RPG with no compass, no map, and a reliance on quest text, says ESO director, which is kind of sad. And I'm just going to say right now, I disagree. I believe a lot of people would play a game with no map, no compass, with very little quest text. Or I do. I have. Scorn, for example, is a game that had no map, no compass, and really didn't give you a lot to go on. You had to fumble your way through. You had to figure it out. There are plenty of games, realistically, that have very few real things that give you that kind of thing. Now, do those games have wide mass appeal? Not so much. But let's get a little further into the article before I go off on my stuff. This is by Harvey Randall. And he says, back in my day, we didn't have these fancy schmancy newfangled quest markers and compass points. We had to download add-ons if we wanted the mini-map to tell us where our 10 boars were, and then walk uphill both ways. If you've been playing RPGs since the early 2000s, you've likely got a similar old man yelling at clouds in your soul. No, mine's an old woman, but you know what I'm. Simply put, open world RPG design has slowly moved away from the discovery part of questing. And it's very true. Look at Skyrim, for example. When I play Skyrim, what's the first thing I do? I don't just wander around. I typically pick a compass point that appears on the compass after I get through the tutorial for the millionth time and head straight for it. Doesn't matter what it is, I tend to pick something different every time. But that's how I start my exploration, is heading towards a quest point. Now, if I didn't have those, I would just wander around randomly. It used to be that quest givers in RPGs, both single player and massively multiplayer, would rely far more on verbal instructions than UI elements. And that was better, in my opinion. Morrowind, in particular, doesn't even have a compass, locking every quest behind some local's vague approximation of the land. That kind of design's gone the way of the dodo, unfortunately, as per an interview with Elder Scrolls Online director Matt Furrer in a piece on open world design by Rock Paper Shotgun. Games that have no compass, no map, where literally the quest is like, go to the third tree on the right and walk 50 paces west, just won't reach a modern audience, Fryer explains. If you did that now, no one would play it. Very few people would play it. Now you need to give them hints and clues, and nobody really wants to devote that much time to problem solving. Like they want to go and be told the story or interact with another player or interact with an NPC. And yes and no. There are, as we have discovered, plenty of people who want nothing more than to basically just watch the game and occasionally press buttons to make the dialogue progress. But there are still plenty of people in this world, I do fully believe, that would absolutely play a game like this. Again, we're going to continue the article before I go off on my own. Rather bravely invoking Morrowind's name. Oh my God, they've spelt his name differently over here. I don't know what his name is now. I'm going to guess it's Fryer. Rather bravely invoking Morrowind's name, Fryer goes on to add that Morrowind is a great game, obviously, presumably because a mob had instantly gathered outside of his place of residence with pitchforks, very likely. However, the way it told its story with the open world is a little out of date for the type of gamers that we have now. They're not all PC or Generation 1 console diehards, right? Who are going to go out and invest as much time in the game as possible. You really want to make sure that it's engaging and fun, and wandering around a field trying to gauge 50 steps from a tree is not part of that anymore, which is kind of sad because I'm old school. Then make old school games. There are plenty of us out here who do like that. I am fully expecting my fellow PC gamer writer and Morrowind lover Joshua Woolens, who isn't in today, to appear outside my door with a sawed-off in the morning for this, but I think Fryer is bang on the money here, at least from the somewhat cynical perspective of someone trying to keep an MMO afloat. Now, MMOs are a slightly different world, but I'll get into that. I say this only because any MMO that's tried to harken back to the halcyon days of hardcore raids has spontaneously combusted. Wildstar, we hardly knew ye. Similarly, no AAA company in their right mind would make an RPG without a compass or quest markers, even if I'd be cheering them on from the sidelines for doing it. This is something that even Elden Ring, a game deliberately designed to be obtuse, is relaxed about. You can even set your own markers on the map. The horror. Speaking of Elden Ring, though, I do think it stands as a decent counterpoint to Friar's words here. Navigating a FromSoft game often involves a lot of puzzle work, especially if you want to follow NPC quest lines. And that's a title that's seen a massive amount of mainstream success. Mind, it's also still possible to reach the end of Elden Ring while ignoring its side quests. Point toward it in the direction of a landmark, and you're going to have an intended experience once you get there. Engaging in the 50 steps from a tree thing is mostly optional. Ultimately, I think the kind of game Morrowind was can absolutely be replicated to great success, but the reality of the situation is that it'd be an experimental indie darling like Dread Delusion. Instead, Friar maintains the actually marketable open-world RPG strategy is to make a space and then just populate it with things to do, and the player can do it in any order. Sometimes you can't figure out what the players are going to figure out because they're smarter than you, but that's what the world is like too. So the points in which I disagree with this are obviously, I fully believe that there are people who would play the game. There are enough people that would play the game that as long as you didn't go overboard on budget, which AAA titles tend to do, you would make money. The biggest problem AAA gaming faces is the fact that they overbloat their budgets. And thus they have to include all of these, as I said at the beginning, quality of life features to encourage I'm not going to call them non-gamers, more relaxed gamers into buying the game because that's the only way they're going to make their money back. Smaller studios have more of a open field to work with, especially if they have a smaller budget. Smaller budget game does not mean bad game. Unfortunately, AAA studios don't seem to understand that. They seem to think they have to throw all their money into the bucket, hire everybody they possibly can, and give it all the most expensive features and bells and whistles in order to sell the game. While bells and whistles and special features and graphics and everything are super cool, they do not make a good game on their own. Just as a good story does not make a good game on its own. If you have writing that's good enough, then you can easily have a game that has no compass, no map, no quest markers. Morrowind is an excellent example. That is an amazing game that people played and still to this day love. Still consider it the best Elder Scrolls game. This coming from the Elder Scrolls Online person doesn't surprise me, considering MMO players, or at least those who develop MMOs, seem to consider their players a little less intelligent than the rest. And of course you are going to have those people when you're talking about a massively multiplayer game. You have to factor in that you are going to have a number of people who are less intelligent than the average bear. That is because think of the dumbest person you know and remember half of everybody is dumber than that. And then that person can get online. And then that person wants to play a video game. So when it comes to MMOs and stuff, I am not surprised when they have to dumb down the gaming experience. Mostly because you're talking about a large group of people. You can't pretend that they're all going to be super smart. However, in single player gaming, there's absolutely no reason why you can't get away with it. I do think features like being able to put your own quest markers down are nice, but I don't think they're necessary. I do think that if that is the type of game you are going to design, then you better be ready for the whining of people who are interested in the game story, but don't want to put the effort into playing it. I think maybe that is something that people didn't understand from my video on Dragon Age yesterday. My feelings in terms of gaming and designing a game. When a game designer comes in and decides the type of game they're going to make, I believe that they should consider the type of experience that they want the player to have. Now, if a game designer comes in and thinks the first experience they want the player to have is the easiest possible experience so they can watch the story, then the game's probably not going to be for me. And realistically, that is where Dragon Age has gone. Now, when we're talking about a FromSoft game, Bloodborne, for example, They have made the game very difficult. And that is the experience the game is supposed to have. Now, you have plenty of people who will complain that finding the story in Bloodborne or Elden Ring or any of the Souls games is too hard. That you have to look for it. That it's not just there in text or through NPC interactions. And while it's true, it's not, there is still a ton of story. I referenced the game Scorn earlier. A lot of people tell me there is no storyline in Scorn. There is absolutely a storyline in Scorn. The problem is in order to find it, you have to pay attention to context clues. You have to pay attention to environment. You have to pay attention to everything going on around you, what you yourself are even just doing. It's all part of the story. Now, it's not a narrative story like, obviously there's a lot of information that you can't have because there's no one to talk to you don't even have a mouth, realistically. But there's a lot of stuff going on in it that tells you, obviously this was a world full of some kind of biomechanically advanced creatures who were somehow using other creatures to power everything. And then something went wrong. The entire planet turned into dust. But for some reason, people or batteries or whatever you want to consider them, keep hatching out, keep being born. And they seem to have a desire to reach a location. And you drive forward going through that. And at one point, there may even be an idea of the consciousness actually recycling through different bodies. I enjoyed Scorn for those reasons because, well, for one, I love biomechanical art. The way that most of that stuff is designed, oh my God, it's gorgeous. I also love the story it tells, just in the art itself. Now, the atmosphere in the game is also really good. And of course, you have people, Scorn did themselves a disservice in that when they advertised the game, they made it look like an action shooter. It is not an action shooter. It is very much a puzzle game. A puzzle walking sim game, people would say. I can understand why they would call it a walking sim, but still, I thought it was a worthwhile game. But one of the main complaints I keep hearing from gamers today, other gamers, one of the main complaints I have myself is that they make this stuff too easy. Horizon Forbidden West or Horizon Zero Dawn, either one works for this example. The yellow paint. The yellow paint telling you where you can climb up on everything. It's ugly, it's frustrating, and it's dumb. Why not give me the ability to try to jump up and find it? I would understand having maybe one or two where you know that it's involved in the storyline itself and you know that people are going to need some help. Give people an idea. Implant the idea in people's heads that you need to look out for these kinds of things, these little ledges, and then leave more of them unpainted as opposed to painting them all. But you're also talking about a very big budget game that can't risk not selling enough to cover its budget. So that's, again, part of why they dumb it down so much, because they have to reach that largest common denominator of gamers. They have to water it down so that they can have the player base that plays the game. And I imagine that's why most of the problems hardcore gamers have with the gaming industry right now are because the gaming industry right now is spending more money than their typical audience can provide them. So the hardcore gamer group can't produce enough money to cover what they're selling. So they water it down and it becomes something less desirable to people like us. I think one of the more frustrating things is listening to them talk about game design and say that they can't do those kinds of things, because at this point you can tell they've completely forgotten or decided that gamers that want those things don't exist. I can only ever speak from my personal point of view, my personal desires. And I am one of those gamers. I am one of the gamers who would like to see things be harder, who doesn't want their hand held in the middle of a game. Yes, with good game design, you can lead people without having to put, and you know what? That puts me somewhere else. Good game design. Good game design can hint at a direction without forcing people that direction. I remember watching a video, I don't remember how long ago, it was probably a few years ago now, where they talked about how in gaming, they would literally just use light to help guide gamers. You would have the direction of the upcoming quest, of the main quest line. You would just put a little bit of light that direction and all the other paths would be dark. So then you would have your naturally drawn through instinct to go down the lighted path. That is the direction to the main quest line. That is without saying anything. That is without doing anything. That is without it being very obvious. It lets the player know without beating them over the head with it. And then at the same time, the player has the option, I can explore down one of these darker paths maybe to find something that maybe's hidden or find a side quest or something like that. What happened to those days? Why does everything have to be so explicitly marked out? Well, no, you know what? Never mind. I know why everything has to be so explicitly marked out now. I was just discussing that, the whole lowest common denominator thing. It's unfortunate and it's depressing. As this says, it is sad. But again, this is a AAA company issue. I'm going to bet that there are probably AA or indie creators that have these things, or that have less hints, that have no compass, that have no map. Actually, I'm relatively positive there are. I can't think of any off the top of my head, but I am quite positive there are. I should probably look into that in the near future. Actually, if you can think of a good indie game, whatever, that doesn't have a map or a compass or quest markers, go ahead and put it down in the comments because I would like to see those. Maybe I'll compile a list. The term that we should all hate at this point is the idea of modern audiences. Anytime they say modern audiences at this point, I just hear stupid people. And I know that's probably a little cruel on my part. For me, the reason I think that is because, not that I think the people are stupid, but because they think the people are stupid. These designers, these producers, these game studios, they don't think people are very bright. Now, there are people out there who aren't very bright, and they have a tendency to be very loud when they're very unhappy, which has a tendency to contribute to the idea that people as a whole aren't very bright, because you get those 100 people on Reddit screaming about how hard it is and how much they hate this and blah, blah, blah. And so the game designer goes back and changes it so that it's easier for those people, and they ruin it for everybody else. An excellent example for this would be the Marvel Avengers game that came out. For the people I know who played that at the beginning, they loved it. They thought the gameplay was fantastic. They enjoyed the game balance. All the characters felt different, felt unique. And then people started complaining on Reddit and on Twitter, and the game designer started changing based on those complaints. And the game lost its sparkle, and now it's been shut down. Helldivers is, I'm very sure, seeing the same thing right now. They have lost about 90% of their player base. They are dropping rapidly, while the new game First Descendant is coming up rapidly. Now, will First Descendant make the same mistake? Will they change things based on who whines the loudest? Or will they step back and look at the thing as a whole and realize maybe that change doesn't need to be made for the small amount of people that are upset? Modern audiences aren't what they think we are. Modern audiences at this stage really just means the people who yell the loudest. And that's unfortunate. That's so unfortunate, because that's why we see so many problems, because the people who yell the loudest are the people with the most time, and very often the people with the least invested in these games. I have no problems with quality of life features in games. I do have an issue with developers shoehorning them in because what they want is the game that will appeal to the widest audience, because they have to, because they're spending too much money. Or they have to because, well, I mean, every game designer wants their game to sell to everybody. They want to sell as many games as possible because they're in it to make money. Even if they love what they're doing, they're in it to make money, because that's how we live. I would prefer games that more specifically cater to what I want, which is part of why I have, for the most part, stepped away from the AAA gaming sphere, because they can't afford to aim towards the niche groups. They have to aim to the wider groups. And by doing that, they lose customers. Unfortunately, they think those wider groups are the ones that are yelling the loudest. I'm getting a little repetitive here. I apologize. All that to say, I really just think game designers should focus on making good games because the audience is out there for them. I think AAA game designers need to step back and think more, and use their budgets more thoughtfully and not try to throw everything in the kitchen sink into their games. And most of all, I think they need to stop underestimating the audience. I think they need to actually understand who their audience are. So many of the problems today are because game designers don't know their audience. They don't know who they are. They don't know what they want. They think they do, but they don't. A lot of them just assume that they are their own audience without thinking past that. But what do you guys think? What's your favorite quality of life feature in a game? Is it maps? Is it compasses? Is it something else that I haven't mentioned? I would love to hear it. Is it the pause button? I know that's a quality of life that we've recently discussed. I would like to thank my channel members, DX Machina NZ, Emperor Doomsday, Zanzoltan, Snake Oil Sean, and Schmitted for being members. I very much appreciate it. Thank you everyone for stopping by and listening and tolerating my little rants. I appreciate that even more than anything else. Thank you so much for watching this video. I really hope you enjoyed it. Please like, comment, subscribe, and turn on the notifications. If you really liked it, you can feel free to share it around, and I will catch you later.